Ever get that kind of icky feeling when a news report tells you your water bottle is crawling with more germs than a toilet seat?
You mean like the stuff Dr. Cameron Jones talks about?
Exactly. Seems our listeners are fascinated by this guy. Sent us a whole bunch of links about him. We've got his website, some YouTube videos, even clips from Australian news, would you believe it?
Oh, wow. He's huge in Australia, apparently.
So before we dive into the dirt, so to speak, let's figure out who Dr. Jones actually is.
Well, his website's actually pretty interesting. Says he's a microbiologist, right? So
Mm-hmm.
bacteria and all that. But then it also says he's a mycologist.
A mycologist. Sounds like he studies, like, mythical creatures or something.
Huh. Not quite. Mycology is all about fungi, mold, yeast, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting combo, expertise-wise.
Okay, so why should we care what what was it, fungi expert has to say about, well, anything beyond maybe what mushrooms to eat?
Well, on his website, Dr. Jones makes a pretty bold statement. What we breathe is fundamental to our health. And he's not just talking about, like, smog or pollution.
He's talking about the stuff we don't see, right?
Exactly. All those biological contaminants in our air, mold, spores, bacteria, the tiny life forms we share our living spaces with. We think about air quality outside, but what about inside?
Which is where those kind of sensational headlines he's got start to make sense. Dirty Beauty, Stanley Cup's dirtier than toilet seats. Definitely gets your attention.
Oh, absolutely a strategy there. But, sensationalism aside, he does have research to back it up. Like, he did a whole study on household dust, found a direct link between certain mold spores, aspergillus specifically, and higher rates of allergies and asthma in kids.
Okay, so maybe there's something to this whole unseen world idea he's pushing, but looking at his YouTube stuff, it seems like he goes way beyond just mold is bad.
You're right, yeah. He connects these microorganisms to some pretty major health issues: immune function, chronic fatigue, even brain health.
Okay, now we're talking. Tell me more.
Well, ever heard of the gut-brain connection?
Vaguely. It's like our stomachs affect our moods or something.
It's about the microbiome, this huge community of bacteria in our gut, trillions of them, like a whole ecosystem living inside us. Turns out that ecosystem affects way more than just digestion.
So we're talking mood, energy levels, even brain function. That's kind of wild, but what's that got to do with breathing?
That's Dr. Jones's big question. What if the microorganisms we're exposed to in our environment, the ones we might be breathing in all the time, are actually impacting that gut microbiome of ours?
Whoa, okay, you just blew my mind a little.
Uh,
So it's not just about being grossed out by a dirty makeup brush. It's about how that could be affecting our health in ways we don't even realize.
Precisely. And his research suggests some of these microorganisms could be linked to those bigger problems he talks about: chronic fatigue, brain fog, maybe even mood disorders.
Is you're saying, like, a little mold in my bathroom could be contributing to bigger health issues down the line? How worried should I actually be here?
That's the million-dollar question. And to be clear, correlation doesn't equal causation. But Dr. Jones points to some pretty compelling studies. For example, he found that people living in damp homes, places with higher levels of certain mold spores, were more likely to report depression and anxiety.
Wow. So this isn't just about a stuffy nose anymore.
Right. Dr. Jones's work is making us rethink how our environment, even the stuff we can't see, might be affecting us in ways we're just starting to grasp.
I gotta say, this is kind of freaking me out a little. Should I be living in a bubble?
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming a hermit. It's important to remember not all microorganisms are bad guys, right?
Oh, right. Some of them are actually good for you.
Exactly. A lot of them are crucial for a healthy immune system. It's
Yeah.
more about balance.
So less about sterility, more about knowing which microbes are the problem and how to avoid them, I guess.
Exactly. Now, something that's been on my mind, we've been talking about Dr. Jones this whole time, but almost everything we've seen, the interviews, the news segments, they're all from Australia. Kind of strange, right?
Yeah, now that you mention it, weird. You think it's an Aussie thing? Like they've got special mold down there.
Huh. Maybe. But on a serious note, it could be about Australia's environment. Maybe mold grows more there, or they're just more aware of it.
Ahead of the curve, maybe?
Yeah.
So are there other experts out there, like globally, looking at this whole microbiome environment health link?
Definitely. Dr. Jones might be the most media savvy,
Yeah.
but tons of research is coming out of different countries. Finland, for instance, they're doing cool stuff on how being in nature affects kids' microbiomes.
So, like, playing in the dirt is good for you. My parents would be thrilled.
Sounds like it. Early exposure to lots of different microbes, especially in nature, seems to build a strong immune system.
Makes sense. But what about the more serious stuff Dr. Jones talks about? The chronic fatigue, the brain fog. Anyone else backing that up?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Studies are popping up all over, linking certain molds to those exact things: fatigue, difficulty concentrating, even mood disorders. It's early days, research-wise, but pretty compelling stuff.
Man, it's crazy to think about our environment messing with our health on such a deep level. Fascinating and scary at the same time, you know?
Right. It really challenges how we think about health. We focus on genes, diet, exercise, but
Mhm.
Dr. Jones and all this new research, it's making us pay attention to these invisible forces too.
Forces that could be, like, behind our fridge right now.
Exactly. And it brings up so many questions. How do we know what we're dealing with? How do we protect ourselves?
And the big one, are we just doomed to be scared of invisible mold forever?
I wouldn't say scared, but informed. It's not about fear, it's about knowledge, right? Understanding the science to make better choices about our health and our environment.
So, we've gone from worrying about dirty makeup brushes to, like, our house is messing with our brains.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It
something.
really makes you think about the bigger picture, right?
It's like we've got this whole other world living inside and around us, and we barely even know it's there. But, okay, back to Dr. Jones for a sec. He's obviously super passionate, but he's also, like, built a whole brand on this stuff. Does
Mhm.
that change how we see his message?
It's a good point. I mean, it's easy to be skeptical of anyone who's, good on camera, especially with health stuff. There's always someone trying to sell us something.
Right. Like, is he just trying to sell us air purifiers now?
Could be,
Uh-huh.
but I do think it's more than that. Dr. Jones's style might be attention-grabbing, sure, but the research he talks about, it's legit. He's not making this stuff up.
So how do we, like, separate the hype from the actual science? Our listeners specifically wanted to know, what's the consensus in the scientific community on all this?
That's the important thing to remember. One expert, even if they're great at explaining things, it's just one voice. We got to look at the bigger picture. And in this case, that means a ton of research happening all over the world.
So it's bigger than just Dr. Jones. He just happened to be the one who caught our attention.
Right. And honestly, that's a good thing. It means there's enough interest to support more studies, more rigorous research. Ultimately, it'll lead to a better understanding of how to protect ourselves.
So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway for our listeners who've stuck with us on this deep dive into the invisible world?
We've spent all this time on the threats, the things that might be harmful, but really it's not about being afraid. It's about being empowered.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly. We'd encourage you, be curious, do your research, ask questions. Don't just take our word for it. This deep dive, it was just the tip of the iceberg. Who knows what other discoveries and solutions are out there waiting to be found?